Welcome to this BYU Education Week class titled Making Family Stories Fun and Engaging for the Next Generation. Before we get started, I want to point out that this is one class in a series of 4 under the umbrella title of Record Your Stories. Keep it simple, make it fun, and involve others. You might want to check out some of the other classes. The first one listed there goes over some of the barriers that keep us from recording our stories and how to burst through those barriers and gain a great deal of enthusiasm for being able to write what you know you want to write or should write. The second one deals with guides, prompts, tips, and tools, just like it says, and it really helps you make the most out of your time spent recording stories and know some tools that you can use that makes the process easier. And the fourth class listed there talks about how you can write with others or record stories with others in church or family, or even just writing group sessions and the incredible blessings that come from those. So hopefully maybe you'll want to check those out. All right, let's get back to today's class. And I want to start out with my story, a little bit about how this class came to be. And it's been in the makings many, many years. And I also want to help you remember the fact that I'm going to be telling you a lot of my experiences. And the idea behind that is that I personally learn the most, I think, when I hear from other people's ideas and their stories and their experiences. So I'm not saying that you should do what I've done in any way, shape, or form, but I'm hoping that my illustrations and things that I'm going to share with you today will be a prompt for you to think of ways in which you could maybe implement the principle or the idea in your own life, okay? So I guess most directly, this story began in about 2010, when my daughter told me that I was going to be a grandmother for the first time. I was so excited. I had been dreaming about this since my children, I stopped having children of my own. And as I thought about that little spirit preparing to come into our family and all of the other spirits that would follow, her cousins that would be coming as well, I got so excited. And I was also surprised by the fact that I didn't have much fear for them. You have to realize that when I was contemplating being a mother myself, anticipating that, I was quite fearful. I knew that Heavenly Father had lost a third of his children, and I was very fearful about how many I might lose to worldly influences. But as I was approaching grandmotherhood, I didn't have that same fear. And it wasn't because I didn't have to worry about the responsibility of it, is I just had a different vision come to my mind. And that is that I was anticipating those wonderful beings in the pre-existence, in that heavenly realm. I realized that they were being prepared for whatever the craziness was that they were going to find on this earth. And that they would also have heavenly beings helping them as they made their journey through the earth. This scripture came to my mind. You'll probably remember it really quickly. It's, "Fear not, they that be with us are more than be with them." Now, it's about Elijah, and the story is really interesting when you read the entire context of it. The Israelites, Syria's armies have been trying to overtake Israel for many years, and they keep setting up ambushes for the army, and the ambushes don't work. The Israelites somehow know that they're there, and they get thwarted. And the king of Syria gets so upset, he's convinced that there's got to be a spy in his inner circle that's letting the Israelites know what's going on. And one of his main men said, "No, it's not us. You don't have a spy. It's Elijah. He's the prophet in Israel, and he's telling them what's going on." So the king of Syria thinks, okay, I got to get this guy if I'm going to conquer. So he finds out where Elijah is at, and he sends his armies to totally surround the city Elijah is. Now, he's not in Jerusalem. He's in another smaller, you might call a suburb or something, a smaller city. And so when his young servant gets up in the morning to fetch water, he realizes that they're totally surrounded by this army. And he also knows that they're there specific for Elijah. And he goes back in and he says, "What on earth are we going to do?" And that's where we pick up the second verse. And Elijah prayed and said, "Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see." And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elijah. Well, I know that my grandchildren have angels around about them, that they will be there to help them through whatever it is that they need to do in their life journey. But I wanted their eyes to be opened to what those angels might be and how they might be surrounding them. Now, another story that kind of goes along with this is, well, first of all, let me back up and show you a quote that points out that I'm not teaching Tana doctrine here. This totally goes with church doctrine. And Joseph Fielding Smith, in April of 1916 General Conference, made the following statements. Surely those who have passed beyond can see more clearly through the veil back here to us than it is possible for us to see them from our sphere of action. I believe we move and have our being in the presence of heavenly messengers and heavenly beings. We are not separate from them. We live in their presence. They see us. They are solicitous for our welfare. They love us now more than ever. They see the temptations and evil that beset us, hence their solicitude and love for us. And their desire for our well-being must be greater than that which we feel for ourselves. Another illustration of this is the movie called The Cokeville Miracle, and it was written and directed by T.C. Christensen. And it's based on the Cokeville Elementary School hostage crisis in 1986, when a madman took over the school and had all the children and teachers come into one room, and he had a bomb attached to himself. I don't really want to give the story away. In case you haven't seen it or read the book, there's a book on it as well. But children, they all survive. The bomb does go off, but all of the children and teachers survive. And many children report having had heavenly angels round about them, protecting them and guiding them, telling them what to do before the bomb went off. So that's an example, a very literal, specific example of how we do have angels helping us. And I've also noticed recently in conference, maybe it's always been there, but maybe it's just my ears are perked up to it, that there's often referrals made to ministering angels on both sides of the veil. Research also backs up how important it is for youth to know about their ancestors. Now, my idea was if they knew about their ancestors, then they would know about the angels that might be surrounding them. In the Cokeville Miracle, the children described their angels and then went home and found pictures of them in the family album. So they knew that their angels that were protecting them were their ancestors. So now let me go on to research that backs this up in many ways. They can't say it's angels from beyond, but the importance of knowing your family history. The Washington Post quoted several studies that showed this, and here was their findings in summation. Teenagers who know their family histories are more likely to show higher levels of social and emotional health. Greater knowledge of family history were associated with a host of positive outcomes for the teens, including better measures of self-esteem, a stronger belief in their capacity to control the future, lower levels of anxiety, fewer behavioral problems, more resilience in the event of hardship, better academic performance, and better relationships with their parents. So there's an academic study showing the importance of having children's hearts turn to their parents. So there's some evidence of that. Elder Gong, in the April General Conference session 2022, also made reference to this study and others that show how much we're blessed by knowing our ancestry. Here's some quotes from Elder Gong's talk. Connecting with ancestors can change our lives in surprising ways. From their trials and accomplishments, we gain faith and strength. From their love and sacrifices, we learn to forgive and move forward. Children become resilient. We gain protection and power. Ties with ancestors increase family closeness, gratitude, and miracles. So now let me show you a picture of my grandchildren as they were about a year ago. And I had to use 2 pictures to get them all in there. The question is, how do you take ancestors with young children and make them all one? Make them know one another, feel towards one another, feel their love. How can even this age feel their ancestors' love around them? Well, I contemplated that for a long time, even when I was just found out that I was going to be a grandmother. And I decided dolls was the best way. And my first idea was to sew dolls that would somehow resemble my mother, my grandparents, and my husband's mother, and so forth, and have all of those dolls named, and so that at least they would know the people's names. Well, I'm not the greatest seamstress, and I just never got around to doing that. So then I got the idea of making paper dolls, and that worked okay, but the children were still too young to really enjoy paper dolls. You have to be about 6 or 7 to really be good with paper dolls. So then I thought, well, maybe if I could find some real dolls. And I actually mentioned this to a dear friend of mine, Jackie Moulton, and I said, I'm looking for dolls. And she said, oh, I did that. She had my exact same idea years and years ago. She had traveled the world, and everywhere she went, she would look for dolls, and she had collected them, and she called them her ancestor dolls. And her children and her grandchildren all knew their ancestors, and the boys had no trouble playing with ancestor dolls when they wouldn't have played with any other dolls. And I thought, fantastic. She rekindled my desire. So I went out that very afternoon and hit several stores looking for such dolls. Well, on the shelves today, the only thing I could find, at least in my price range, was Barbie dolls, action figure dolls, baby dolls, nothing that would resemble any of my ancestors. So I went online and did a search there. And again, I couldn't find anything that would match what I was looking for. So the idea went on the back burner. Then one day I was in Desert Industry going to find something else, and I walked by this aisle of toys. On the very top shelf on this aisle were a bunch of dolls, exactly like what I was looking for. And I hurried over there and I picked up the first doll, and I almost started crying because I knew exactly who that doll was. And I put all the dolls into the shopping cart, and I got them home, and I had so much figuring out who was who. Well, I know that experience was such a success because when I told my daughter all about it, now this was my daughter who had never played with dolls in her life. It was just a matter of weeks later, she called me from a different city, and she says, Mom, I'm at DI, and they've got all these dolls here. Do you need some more? And I said, well, yeah, we have lots of Danish ancestry. I need some blondes, all the blondes you can find. Well, not only did she buy the blondes, she bought every doll she could put her hands on. I knew then I had an idea. If I even had my daughter excited about this, I had her. Now, I think you might see in a second right here why I was so excited. Let me pick up the doll. This is the first doll I picked up that I almost started to cry because I knew who she was. This is my paternal grandmother, my grandma Maudie. And you can see why I'm so excited if you look at this picture of her in her high school dress. High school graduation dress, I should say. And here is the doll, side by side. Isn't that remarkable? It almost sends shivers up and down me. Well, she's not the only one that resembles some of my ancestors. Check out her mother. This is Bertha, and that is Bertha in her wedding dress, and that is Bertha doll. Now let me introduce you. This is my paternal line. Here's my maternal line. This is my mother and her doll. You will, if you look closely, you will see that the doll has a book in her hand. I'm trying to make it look like scriptures. I decided to try and individualize these dolls and help them tell the story of their lives. My mother has many accomplishments, but what she loved most was teaching the gospel. And in 7 different wards, over a span of 45 years, she served as a gospel doctrine teacher. So that's why she has that little book in her hand. Now, this is my mother's mother, Millie. And she is depicted, I chose her as a doll, as a child doll, because she came down with polio as a child. And her father bought her one of the very first tricycles in the whole Utah Territory, had to order it from back east to try and work her legs so that she would be able to learn to walk again. She also dressed kind of nicely because she did have money and affluence. Her father owned the grocery store in town, as well as orchards, and he'd been a worker on the railroad and went up the ranks in the railroad system and then settled in Utah. You will notice she has a little ring around her neck, a necklace, and that is because part of her story is she said the very first prayer that she ever had answered was in searching for that lost ring. She had lost it, and she prayed, and she immediately felt impressed to walk over to a wood pile, move a couple of logs, and there it was, and she found it. Now this is Millie's mother, Charlotte. Now all of the dolls that I'm going to show you today are in the dresses that I found them in. I have not redressed them. I have restyled their hair a little bit, but I haven't redressed them at all. And Charlotte, to me, looks like she's in a Christmas dress, and I decided that fit very well because Charlotte, Millie's mother, was Relief Society president for over 25 years, and with her husband's generosity and their store, she was known for taking packages to the poor all over the valley for all of her years. So I think to see her as Mrs. Santa Claus really works. Now this is my mother's paternal grandmother, Minnie. And there's another part of a story that I want to tell you on this one. You can see I think that they kind of resemble each other. With Minnie, when I came to settling on Minnie and telling her story, I realized, wait a minute, I've got story dolls. I should have story books. Maybe I should write little books to go with them. And by this time, my grandchildren, the oldest ones, were of reading age. So I wrote this little book, and it's very simple. That's clear picture, but here you can see how it looks for my kids. It's just a 8x10 piece of paper folded in half and stapled. They can wear them out and I can reprint them. It's something you could easily do if you wanted to. And here's the idea behind this. Minnie has a fascinating story that you can find on Family Search, but it's buried kind of in this genealogical rich document. In years past, people would put names and dates and places in their life history so that there would be a record of them. We don't have to do that now because we have so many other means of documenting that information. So the old documents that were written are not the most necessarily easy reads, friendly reading, especially not for elementary age children. So what I did is I took the record that had already been written and I edited it down and simplified it. I didn't have to change much other than editing down to where I had the kernel essence of their stories. And here's kind of a page of it. And I want to read, you can read along, I want to read a little bit of it so you kind of get a flavor for what I mean for putting our family stories this way. Minnie was also 9 when she was sent to herd 13 rams on the hillside by herself. One day while she was herding, a group of Indians rode back and forth with their rifles cocked, whooping and yelling. They were looking for an Indian woman who had left their camp. Minnie was terrified. She hid in sagebrush and prayed for protection. She thought the Indians would shoot her if they saw her. When she got home, she learned that her grandmother Hanson had hid the woman in the granary. They fed and cared for her for 3 days. Then the Indian woman left and hid in the willows, only to be found and killed by her tribesmen. That same year, Pocatello, the painted feathered chief of the northern Shoshone tribe, visited the Hanson farm many times. They treated him like a king because they were afraid of him. He had led attacks against early settlers in the Great Basin. Minnie's job was to stand by his chair and wait on him. She was frightened, almost speechless, when she listened to him beg her father to give him to her. You likely have fantastic family stories too that you could put into a simplified format like this and give them as little books to your grandchildren, the younger ones, that they could read. I attempted to edit this to where it was about on a 4th grade reading level. Now, I didn't have a picture of Pocatello, so I took a picture off the internet This is a painting, and I was able to embed it in the story. So those are some ideas of things you can do. Then another year, my daughter asked me to prepare a doll for the 24th of July celebration our family was gathering for. And she said, Mom, have you got an ancestor that was a pioneer that you can highlight for all the kids this year? And maybe make a coloring page that they could color off of that would go along with your story. And I thought, okay, great, I could do that. So I sat down and I thought, well, more than just a picture of this doll, I want it to maybe be the whole family as they came across the plains. So this is Honora, and what I did is I tried to depict her in the picture as she is in her dress so that the children could see that they mirrored each other. And again, these are the dresses that the dolls were wearing when we bought them. I then put all the children there, and this is the master copy, I guess you could say, that I used to tell the story. The coloring sheets that weren't colored in, but on this one I did color it in to match her dress, and then I put color on the child that we descend through. He's got a blue scarf, so that they could help see this. On the back of this page, if you flip it over, you will see this information sheet so that the older children could actually tell the story themselves. It identifies the points of what are important points of the story that go along with their migrating and coming to the valley, the year, their ages, lists the family, the members that came and their ages. I underlined Heber because he is who we descend through, and that's there are pictures there. Of course, their pictures are older than when they came across the plains because that's when it was available. Well, I had so much fun getting that one sheet ready. I thought, well, wait a minute. I want to do this for all of our pioneer ancestors. So I looked and saw how many I had, and I got those ready. And then I thought, well, no, I got to do my husband's too, because that's my children and grandchildren's pioneer heritage through him. So this is what I ended up with a week later. You can see the year. If you start up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the year in which they came, 1847, 1848, so on and so forth. And the dolls that went with those families, and then I drew pictures of the families again as they came across. You will notice that there are 3 single men depicted who came by themselves, not with their families, to the valley. And this became a wonderful way in which I could depict the men, because I don't have male dolls, and I wanted them to know the males as well as the females, and this became a great way so that, anyway, I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. But if you'll see that upper left-hand corner, here is that ancestor. It's through my husband's side, Lewis Barney. And again, it's a coloring sheet that the kids could color. Here is a picture of me showing Honora. I didn't show the kids all of these stories at once. It would have been overkill, but this was how I gave them Honora. And you can see the bin that I keep the dolls in, and the kids always want to know when they can have story time. When they come to my house, or if I go to their house with the bin, the first question is, when can we have story time? They have become enamored with these dolls. And I also have the rule that they can't play with them until they're baptized, because they are China face, and that makes them actually more precious and something to attain to, something to look forward to. Here's a family group sheet that I made, and then I attached the dolls so that it's really easy to see how they go along. And you can actually even see Honora over there, and where she is Charlotte's husband's mother. Well, you might not be able to draw. To tell you the truth, neither can I. I got to give you my secret of how I came upon doing this. It started with my neighbor, Linda Magleby. She wrote a coloring book called My Pioneer Ancestries. And this is one of the pages in it. On the left, she would write their story about their pioneer heritage. And then on the right, she depicted them as they came across the plains. I told you I get my best ideas from other people, not necessarily from me. So maybe you can get some ideas from this. She depicted them in clothing that would have been typical to their heritage of where they came. Here's another one, and these were more from Norway, I think. Well, what I did with her permission is I took copies of her figurines. And then what I did is I created my own draftsman board. This is just my dining room table with the leaves pulled apart, not the leaf in, but just pulled apart. Then I put a plate of glass, actually it was a piece of glass I just had that sits on top of one of my desks, over the top of it, a lamp underneath it. Then I would put a blank sheet of paper, and then I would kind of draw the outline, at least, of the figures, and then modify them to adjust for ages and gender and so forth, to be able to come up with the drawings I did. You don't have Linda as a resource. So what if you wanted to do your own coloring book? How could you do it? Well, there's several ways. One is you can go online and you can find lots of paper dolls already there for easy for the printing, and you could adjust their faces and their hair styles and so forth to match ancestors if you have pictures of your ancestors. That's pretty easy to do. Another thing you could do is actually take pictures of pioneers who've sat for pioneer pictures or whatever, and just use that as an outline to give you the bodies and the clothing and so forth, and then just make adjustments as I did to the face and the hair and so forth, so it'll match yours. And there's another resource, and that's, if you look here, it says familytech.byu.edu. If you plug that in to your search engine and go there, you will find a tab that will take you to, it says Ancestor Games. If you click on that, you will see under there that it will help you create ancestor coloring sheets. If you put in a picture of an ancestor, they will create a coloring sheet just like that for you off of it. It'll only be there, well, it'll be whatever the picture looked like, but that's what you can do easily. They also have right there a resource for you to create your own crosswords and word searches. I forgot to mention that in the back of Linda's coloring book, that red coloring book I showed you, she has a word search and she has a crossword puzzle so that you can practice the names of the ancestors and know them there. So right here, you can easily create your own as well. Now I want to tell you a couple other ways in which you can use dolls or record your stories. This is Maudie. If you remember, she was the first doll. I was so excited. This is my father's mother. And this is a book I compiled for my Martin heritage, Martin and Benton's. I have a copy of it here. And you can see it's not very big. And I just bound it this way. When I sat down to write this, my prompting was, I give some sort of a family history present every Christmas. And this year I was prompted by a nephew of mine who was having a few struggles, and he identified very much with this Martin side of the family because he loves cowboy stuff. And I thought, okay, I want to give him especially his heritage through this. And so that was my prompting for it. And I sat down and started to write, and I didn't get more than 2 paragraphs, and I said, this is ridiculous. Why should I rewrite this history? I already have. And then I thought of the resources I had. I had a great uncle's small story. I had a very detailed obituary. I had my grandmother dictate to me her life story, and I had transcribed that. So I decided to just compile all of that into this. And my point is, you can do the same thing, or even just one story very easily. Now, here's a couple of suggestions if you go about doing that. This is Bertha, Maud's mother, and here is her story in the book. Her wedding dress with her husband. She was only 14 when they got married, and they built a sod house. And then, from the sod house, they built a farmhouse. They eventually sold the farmhouse to move their children to town, where Charles built this hotel, which was successful so the kids could go to school. Then they sold this and moved to a bigger city, and he bought this hotel and ran this hotel so his children, his girls, which was unusual for the time, so his girls could go to high school. Now, I had these pictures, but I didn't have this picture of the sod house, so I found that on the internet. My thinking was I wanted to have this be visually rich so that my grandchildren would enjoy looking at it. I also put it in 2 columns for the same reason, to make it easy reading. Then, really quickly, Charles, who I mentioned, he bought that hotel. He was a loving, kind, generous man, and he co-signed on a buddy's loan note. Well, his buddy did not make good on the loan, and Charles ended up losing everything. Had to sell his hotel to cover the loan, and the only amount of money he had left over was enough to buy this Ford touring car. And then he and his family took off from Nebraska up through Montana, eventually ending up in Washington State, which is where I ended up being born. So that's very much my history. And I kind of knew it, but I didn't think that much about it until one day I was in Detroit, and on a rainy day I went into the Ford Museum. Nobody else was there, it seems. And as I was walking around, I wasn't really looking for this car, but then all of a sudden there it was in front of me, and I went, oh! And I was so excited, I guess one of the guards or workers in the museum saw me, and he came over and struck up a conversation, and he said, would you like to sit in it? And I said, can I? And he moved the rope aside, and he let me get in and sit. And so while I was sitting there, I told him that, this had been a car of my grandparents, and they had driven it from Nebraska up through Montana and so forth. And he said, no, wait a minute, what year was this? And I couldn't remember for sure. I said, I think it was about, 1916. Well, right here in the record, I can tell you it was 1915. And he says, wait a minute. Do you know how remarkable that was? And I said, well, yeah, it was pretty remarkable. Yeah, they had to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and start all over. And he says, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He said, there were no roads then. And I said, there had to have been roads. How would they have gotten gasoline? And he said, well, these cars could run on any kind of fuel. They could run on kerosene lamps. They probably stopped at ranchers and bartered and got fuel for their car that way. And then all of a sudden, this became so much more meaningful. Now, the other tip I have is to include maps in your stories so it brings it to life. So now I'm seeing them going from where they started in Nebraska all the way to Montana without roads, over cattle trails when they could find them. And sure enough, when I read the account again, I found that Paul, my great uncle, had recorded that, how they had to take down fences to go through and then put fences back up. Anyway, it's fascinating. I found this picture of a Ford touring car with campers in 1920. Perhaps the Benson's campsites look something like this. So there you have it. These are some ways in which you can make paper copies of your family stories more intriguing and interesting for your kids. Now, I want to point out, though, that children really like electronics, and teenagers especially. They love to get their stories electronically. So when you're wanting to share stories, you might want to just do it one story at a time. Think about all the missionary letters that we send out. Maybe you struggle to think of something interesting to say, like, your weeks are a lot the same every week. What if instead of telling them about your same week, you told them a family story? They would be delighted to get it. It would mean something to them. And you could also do it even if they're not missionaries. You could have ancestor birthday texts so that you're aware of them, and you could send them little text messages. You could have holiday celebrations that highlighted your ancestors. And you could have grandkids make blogs or Twitch games or TikTok posts about ancestors. There's all kinds of ways in which we can use the tools the Lord has given us in this dispensation for helping us turn our children's hearts to their parents. Now, you might also have family reunions where you're able to turn your hearts of your children to their ancestors. But some of your reunions might go a little bit something like this. This is Jackie, a dear friend of mine, and I want to point out her story of family hit stories. Enjoy it, and maybe it'll prompt you to think of your own reunions and how you could liven them up.
When I was a little girl, we sometimes made a car trip to Riverton or Harriman to visit our country cousins. We'd also zip out there once a year for a family reunion. When we went out for a family reunion, Aunt Ruby usually drove out with Grandma and with my two cousins, Joyce and Bob. So Joyce and I had a good time reuniting with the relatives near our age. The men were mostly farmers, and although their language wasn't peppered with some of the four-letter words we hear on TV today, they weren't averse to throwing around a few damns and hells. Years after these childhood memories, nothing had changed, and Michelle and I both remember a reunion where we were welcomed by one of the in-laws, something like this. After he had jumped up on a corner table so everyone could see and hear him. "Quiet!" Pause. "Quiet, everybody!" Pause. And then a loud whistle through his fingers and a "Shut up!" That got our attention. Hell, I was asked to be the greeter this year, so welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Hey, stop your yapping over there so as we can have blessing on the food. I don't know about you, but I'm damned hungry. One more slight pause. I'll say it. And he folded his arms, bowed his head, and sent up our combined thanks. With all the accumulated memories of those reunions, I can't remember enjoying those meals. The countryside had lots of cows and horses, and therefore lots of flies. Those flies loved the food even more than we did, and roamed in droves over it, and feasted on it until my squeamish nature made it hard to bring anything up to my mouth. Once, when Joyce and I were out about 8 or 9, our parents had volunteered us to perform for the clan. Joyce had been taking tap dancing lessons, and I'd had 2 years training on the violin. It was even harder to eat that time. Our stomachs were reacting to our stage fright, but somehow we performed one after the other. Later in the evening, one of the women came up to me and looked me over. "Aren't you the little girl who entertained us earlier?" I nodded. "Oh, you did a wonderful job. How long have you been taking lessons?" "About 2 years," I mumbled. "Well, you gave us a treat. I hope I got out a thank you. I've always enjoyed tap dancing." I didn't respond that time.
So our family reunions are stories in and of themselves. We can do a lot of things to spice up our own reunions, whether it's a big reunion or just a family gathering like on Sundays. For instance, do you have a wedding dress tucked away somewhere, maybe turning a little yellow and not doing much good? Maybe you could pull it out as a prop to tell a story and turn your children's heart to ancestors, and maybe more. Let's start with this. This is Catherine's story about her mother's wedding dress.
When my mother came to live with us in Provo at age 99, she brought with her a small photo album from her teenage years in Price, Utah in the 1920s. Pretty and popular, she was pep club president and lead in the school play at Carbon High. Most of the pictures in the album were taken on outdoor excursions with her many friends, but she loved posing for the camera in mischievous photos, pouting in a sultry baby doll dress or standing on the running board of a Model T dressed like a flapper. 70 years later, even with her significant memory loss, she could not only recall the first and last names of all her girlfriends, but their boyfriends as well. While everyone else seemed to go steady throughout high school, my mother appears in photographs with several different boys. Her favorite was Glenn Jones. She drew white hearts around his picture on the black album pages, and she sighed longingly when she said his name. But he lived in Castle Gate, which was too far from Price for a long-term romance. My father lived in town. He was 4 years older than my mother, with a job at a bank and his own car, and he became an attractive option, making his appearance in the last few pages of the album. When my mother graduated from high school, her father, a mine superintendent, bought his youngest daughter a delicate pink chiffon dress from a fancy store in Chicago for $50 to wear at commencement. I still have the dress. It is missing one of the sheer triangular panels from the hem. Apparently that was needed for a sewing project, but it is otherwise in good shape. Mom attended the University of Utah for 1 semester, but my father bombarded her with letters written in a special code of his own devising. His pleas won her over, and she came back home to Price. Bessie Catherine Gibson married Eugene Carl Hansen on January 11, 1927, in her high school graduation dress. choosing the day for its family significance. Her mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother had also married on January 11th. According to the family story, the first couple, Sarah Ann Alger and John Pulsifer, were married on January 11th, 1842 in Nauvoo by the prophet Joseph. My mother had 3 older sisters who lived to adulthood, but none of them married on January 11th, so she was left to carry on the tradition.
Okay, that was fun. Now let's see what Catherine goes on to say about her own wedding dress.
I met my future husband, Randy Schertz, when we were both in graduate school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Randy was from Cedar City, and when we went home for Christmas, he proposed on the grounds of the St. George Temple on the last day of December 1973. As my mother's only daughter, born when she was 40, I had always assumed that I too would marry on January 11th, but Randy and I decided that January 11th was either much too soon or way too far in the future, and we planned our wedding for June 12th, 1974. Planning a Utah wedding long distance from Cambridge was a challenge which my mother took on enthusiastically. She had waited 21 years to have a daughter, and then almost 26 years after that for me to marry, and she was ready for a big celebration. Mom turned to the matter of a wedding dress. She found a lovely second-hand dress glistening with beads and sparkles and sent me a picture with my niece Lori as model. I didn't mind the slightly used part, but beads and sparkles were not my style, so I went wedding dress hunting at Lord & Taylor's in Boston. Amazingly, the second dress I tried on was perfect. Made from a smooth Kiana fabric with not a sparkle in sight, it had a high neck, long sleeves, and a train. The veil was reminiscent of a hood from a medieval cloak. Fran said that she could envision arriving on a white horse to meet a bride in such a dress. It cost $275, quite a sum at the time, but it was ideal, and compared to today's prices, a real bargain. I justified the expense of my wedding dress with the thought of using it as a temple dress as well, but it was really too formal. My own daughters, however, suggested another use for it. The first Star Wars movie appeared in 1977, and my wedding dress does look surprisingly similar to something from Princess Leia's wardrobe. Why not use it as a Halloween costume? 2 buns on the side of my head, and I would be set.
I hope you found those fun to think about as they were told the stories of Catherine's clothes or dresses and so forth, but I hope it also prompted you to think of maybe some items that you have in your own home. Maybe you could pull out a wedding dress on Valentine's Day, your anniversary, or some other family gathering and use it as a prop to tell your story. Maybe let grandchildren try on the dress. Also pull out pictures of those who were present at your wedding celebration and tell their stories and the background. In this way, create a really strong family bond and connection of the different generations at different times together. You might also have some other items lying around that kids could wear and play with. For instance, these are gloves of my husband's grandfather, paternal grandfather, that he worked in, and if you turn them over and saw that they actually have been worked on heavily. Putting your hands inside of them makes you feel very connected to this man. And up above there is a pair of opera glasses that his wife owned, and just the children have fun looking at those, and then also talking about, well, what did Gus, that's what they called her, what did Gus see through these glasses? What was she looking at? What did she experience in her life? So those are fun prompts. Now, maybe you have some family stories that you want to record. I want to point out the importance of recording those from your perspective. And that's the most powerful and most accurate way. What your siblings remember or cousins might be different, but what you record from your perspective is truth. I love this writing that Elaine Marshall wrote about her grandma Shaw.
Virtue Pearl Chard was born on December 13, 1883 in North Ogden, Utah. My father, Rulon C. Shaw, was her 11th and youngest child. Others have compiled histories of Grandma. I will give my story and impressions of Grandma Shaw. She was 65 when I was born, so I grew up knowing her only as an older woman. I do not have a first memory of her. She was always there. She was tiny and feisty, funny without intention, and intense without notice. A more serious version of the character of Granny on the television series The Beverly Hillbillies would be her caricature, but she lived her name in every way, virtue. Grandma suffered typhoid fever as a child that left her hearing impaired. She wore hearing aids in each ear with a cord to a battery pack kept in her apron pocket. At home, she always wore a dress and an apron. When she dressed up, her tiny shoes were black lace-up, chunk-heeled orthopedic Oxfords. I have early memories of her dress-up wardrobe to include a hat. By the time I knew her, she and Grandpa had moved from the farms in Liberty to Ogden to the little white house with the crabapple tree in the front yard. When I was old enough to drive to school and to my job in Ogden, the easiest route was past her house going east on 2nd Street toward Harrison Boulevard. I would occasionally stop to visit. One of our most memorable conversations was when she told me how my father was one of those menopause babies. She was not amused to be pregnant at nearly 44 years old, already having borne 10 children that included the loss of 2 baby boys. She told the story decades after my father's birth with the same displeasure as if it were recent. I could not tell who she was most mad at, my grandfather or my father. Keep in mind, I was about 20 years old, and this baby she did not want was the father of the person she was telling, and he was now 43 years old. She told other strong-willed stories, such as more recently when Grandpa went out in the middle of the night to take his water turn and repeatedly brought back mud onto the kitchen floor. So one night she locked him out.
Don't you love how Elaine was able to make those people come alive? And they didn't seem like characters. They seemed like such lovable people. So I think sometimes we're tempted to record histories of our ancestors in just the most glowing terms. And there's nothing necessarily wrong, but I think we identify with them so much more when we see them in their real flesh and bones. And I just love that illustration of how Elaine did that. And how I've learned when I've listened to many people record their stories of their ancestors, how I love the slightly human, flawed characters all more than the others. Okay, now I want to give you some other ideas in which you can use to turn children's heart to their parents, and these can be used as all age groups. But first, these early ones I've used especially with my grandkids. This is a showing of a card game called Concentration, where you turn them over and you try to get match sets. And this is of my grandma Maudie, a picture of her and her doll. Or I could make it with her name if the child was old enough to read, so they would be able to match the ancestors with his name. Or I could also create a concentration game with husband and wife so that they could recognize match sets. So that's one thing you could do. Jeopardy is another game that's really fun. We did this one family reunion, and this is the storyboard that I used. And so that it means something to you, I'm just going to put the dolls on top. And even though you don't know my family history, you recognize some of those dolls already. And it goes to show how well dolls work at all ages, helping us recognize and put stories together as one rather than having them all get mushed up. That's been a real problem for me. As I've read a lot of my history, I got mixed up who was who and what was what. So I created what I called crib notes. I read through the histories that had already been written, and then I made something that looks like this that you can see on your screen, where I put the husband on one side, the wife on the other, and I put detailed that came from their stories. I also listed how old they were when they got married, and then their children. If the age is underlined by where the child was born, that meant that that child did not survive past 10 years. So I made crib sheets like this, actually for myself in the beginning. I didn't have the doll's picture on there, but I did that thinking, I'm going to die one day, and I'm not going to remember who's who. Have you ever gone to a party and not remembered who's what and been so embarrassed? Well, that's what I visualized myself going into the next life, and I thought, I can know at least 8 people, 16 couples. I can know at least that much. And so I created these crib sheets initially to help me. Well, then what I did, and here's another example of another one, is I sent these to my children before we played that Jeopardy game, before our family reunion, so that they would be able to know the stories. And one thing that surprised me is when we did it, is one of my sons was really disappointed. He said, "Mom, these are too easy. I really know my family. I wanted to show off." So I would caution you, if you put together a Jeopardy game, make it a little bit challenging, which will be incentive for them to really learn the details of their family stories. Okay, another thing that you can do is, how about Wheel of Fortune? You would have fun with tweaking this to tell about the fortunes of your ancestors and their lives. Now, you don't have to know how to do Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune on your own. You might be thinking, I have no tech skills. That's okay. Lean on the children, your children or grandchildren, to help you with it. Again, they have more skin in the game. They will know their ancestors more. Teachers are the ones who get most out of a lesson. Those who help you prepare these materials for your family gatherings are the ones who are going to get the most out of it. But I want to point out that resource that I showed you before about BYU, familytech.byu.edu, has these resources as well. You will find, now I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, Genoparody. Instead of Jeopardy, they call it Genoparody. And you can use that as a template for making a Jeopardy game. I also will tell you that if you go online, you can find free templates that you can download for Jeopardy. That's what I did. It had the song, it had the daily double, it had everything. All you had to do is plug your information into it. And again, go ahead, use your grandchildren. They will know how to do that very easily. But on this website, Family Tech, you can also find the Wheel of Family Fortune template and these games as listed down there. So there's lots of resources there you can check out. Well, if you don't want to do those, there are other games you can also modify. How about The Price is Right? You could play that if you knew how much an ancestor paid for a house or a car or for a trip or whatever. It's just a great tool to tie in children back to the stories and making them come alive. You could do something similar with Pictionary, with them drawing someone's name and then having to draw something that went along with that person so everybody could guess it. And I also thought Twister would work. You could have each of the colors represent a different family line, so that if you spun it and it landed on, or you could draw a name instead of spinning. You could draw a name, you'd have to know what line that person was from, and then put your hands down on the dots where it went on that. Or maybe you have the game Uno, you could turn into Uno. And I put the doll pictures on here. You could also create Go Fish, Old Maid, any number of games to help your children and grandchildren know their ancestors. And it's really fun. And even if you make them for children, you'll find out that the older kids want to play them, and even the adults as well. Now, the last point that I want to make is that our children and grandchildren are part of our family history. This is an example of what my daughter has done. She says that if you take Instagram pictures, you can easily order them into a book. I've never done it, but she says it's really easy. And so she will take pictures throughout the year, and she'll also write notes about them. She's hysterical, so what she's written is usually quite funny. And so both what she said about the picture and the picture are printed. And I thought this was a fantastic example of my grandchildren on this within this family, how they were dealing with COVID. And that whole COVID year was recorded this way. So you want to pull those out. That's another way you could have, you could tie children to their ancestors. You could have their book with their ancestors' book, and you can look for commonalities. There are so many ideas out there. I hope you have gotten some idea, some inspiration of something new you want to do that will help turn your children's hearts to their fathers. Thank you.